Good afternoon, everyone. It is 4:04, and the State Allocation Board will come to order. This meeting is our first hybrid meeting. We're in person at the
Recording in
auditorium
progress.
of the East End Complex located at 1500 Capitol Mall at the Department of Healthcare Services. If you'd like to provide public comment in person, we also have a Zoom link for members of the public that would like to participate remotely. For this meeting to run efficiently, if you are participating remotely, please note the following guidelines. You'll be muted during the meeting. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom meeting interface, and we will call on your name at the appropriate time, and OPSC staff will unmute you. We do have 2 speaker cards up here in person, and we'll call both of you from these cards during the item for which you wish to speak. And if you are calling in and do not have the Zoom app and are not here in person, unfortunately, you will not be able to participate in public comment. We apologize for that. There will be no closed session at today's meeting. And it gives me great joy that Ms. Rebecca Kirk is here. She is a phenomenal, she's joining us as she was appointed by the governor as the executive officer of OPSC to replace Ms. Silverman and the State Allocation Board. She begins January 31st, and we really can't wait. I had the privilege of working with Rebecca for a few years at the Department of Finance, where she was an assistant program budget manager. But more importantly, Rebecca brings just an incredible, forthright attitude, is a problem solver, is incredibly smart, a remarkable leader, and truly a joy to have such a phenom joining us at the State Allocation Board. So thank you for being willing to serve the people of the state of California. I know that the Gaming Commission will, it's a big loss for them, but we are really, really grateful. So welcome, and we look forward to seeing you in January. Do you want to say anything? No?
Hello, Madam Chair, members. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you for your kind words, Gail. I'm not officially on board yet. As you said, on January 31st next week, I'm very excited to be coming on board as the executive officer. I'm really truly honored and excited to be able to serve in this capacity and, in a sense, return home, since I started my state career here at OPSC actually in 2007. So thank you so much, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yay. So I think, unless anyone else wants to make a comment, we'd love to take the roll, and we're just thrilled to have everyone here in person.
Great. Senator Wilk.
Present.
Senator Laird. Senator Newman.
Here.
Assemblymember Murasucci.
Here.
Assemblymember Davies.
Here.
Assemblymember Alvarez.
They actually went to the bigger office.
Oh, bummer.
Thank you.
Would he like to, is staff here?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Juan Morales.
Here.
Jeremy Smith. Ana Lasso.
Present.
Gail Miller.
Here, we have a quorum, and we will, in the event we have any rolls, we'll keep them open for both Senator Laird and Assemblymember Alvarez.
Great. Thank you.
So our first order of business are the minutes from the December 4th, 2023 meeting. Any public comment? Any questions?
Wilk moves.
Thank you. Moved by Senator Wilk, seconded by Ms. Davies. May we, any objection to unanimous roll on the minutes since we're all in person? No? That will be the order, but we will keep it open for the Assembly member and the Senator. Next, Mr. Watanabe, who has served with incredible distinction and is probably the best team player I've ever met, and can take a ball and run with it all the way down the field, and it's not as stressful as watching the 49ers. Will you please provide your executive officer statement? We are really, really grateful for everything you've done to keep us going. So thank you, Mr. Watanabe.
Thank you. Just a few comments today. As many of you seen, on January 10th, Governor Newsom released his proposed budget for the 24-25 fiscal year. 3 impacts to our program. Previous budgets had proposed $875 million for the school facility program for the 24-25 year. That has been reduced down to $375 million going forward. Secondly, under the California Preschool Transitional Kindergarten Full Day Kindergarten Facilities Grant Program, in prior year budgets, the governor had suggested the intent for $550 million for our program in 23-24. That was delayed last year to 24-25. That is again being pushed to 25-26. So we'll keep an eye on those and see how that impacts our programs as they move forward to the legislature. And then lastly, the governor has stated his intent that for the spring he intends to work into negotiations with the legislature as they work forward to a potential November 2024 bond. So we'll be monitoring those as all three items move through the legislature. The only other item I had to present is just a summary, but I'll present them later also in the agenda. We have our annual index to the school facility program adjustments. We're looking at a decrease of 1.33% in our school facility program grants this year. That'll also impact any grants for the full-day kindergarten program as well. We also have our annual or biannual adjustment that we do in even number of years for level 1 developer fees, and that's an increase of 7.84%. So we have that. And our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, February 28th.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Watanabe? Seeing none, are there any public comments? There's none on Zoom either, right? Unfortunately, we're in a little bit of a dead area. No, great. So we will now move on to the consent agenda, please, Mr. Watanabe.
Yeah, consent agenda is on page 34 through 76, and it's ready for your approval.
Any questions? Any public comment? Thank you, Assemblymember Marzouchi. Moved by Marzouchi, seconded by Senator Newman. Seeing no public comment, any objection to unanimous roll? Seeing none, that will be the order, and we will leave the roll open again. Next, we will move to the financial reports, please, Mr. Watanabe.
Thank you. Direct your attention to page 77 of the agenda. It's just to highlight our fund releases for the last 2 months since we last met. We continue to release a lot of cash directly out to school districts. In November, we released $131 million, and in December, another $21 million to school districts. That's cash straight out the door to school districts. The other thing I just wanted to mention on page 79 is our status of funds. You do see, as you noted in your consent approval, there's very little activity this month. That's because any funding items that are impacted by the school facility grants adjustments will be presented at the February board. So you'll see little activity on that one. With that, I'll take any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions on the financial reports? Seeing none, we will move on to our next item, which is the Jacoby Creek Elementary School District appeal. Mr. Watanabe?
Thank you. This request is to present the district's request for approval for financial hardship status in the school facility program under other evidence deemed reasonable by the board. Jacoby Creek Elementary School District is a one-school school district up in remote Humboldt County. They serve 459 students, grades K through 8 on their campus. We had two requests from this district in the past for new construction modernization for separate design apportionments. Those were returned because they didn't meet the qualifying criteria on their own. But as the district was able to move forward with their most critical needs and design the project, they did later submit full funding applications to our office, for which they're also again requesting financial hardship status. Statute and regulations are very clear on the guidelines for automatically qualifying for financial hardship, and unfortunately, the district does not meet those qualifying criteria. The first one is that the district's total bonding capacity is less than $5 million. In this district's case, it's $5.5 million. The district in their appeal request has pointed out that number has been set in statute since 1998 and has never been inflated for inflation. They are accurate in that respect, and we would note that current bond proposals out there are proposing to raise that limit as acknowledged of that one, but it is spelled out in statute and regulations, so staff cannot administratively approve that request. The second option for the district is to have a current bond indebtedness of over 60%. This district is currently at 56.47%. We estimate they need to borrow roughly $195,000 to clear that 60% threshold to automatically qualify the program. We did point out to the district, it doesn't appear to be an option. Humboldt County Office of Education has attached a letter to their appeal request in the agenda. They do not recommend the district take on any more debt because of the small size of the district and the fluctuations in their budget as a result of that. And then the last criteria is the school district, if they've passed the bond in the last 2 years, they also automatically qualify for the program. This district's last bond proposal was in November 8th of 2016. They were successful in that proposal. They approved $2.7 million towards their district projects, but as you would note, that's over half their bonding capacity. even if they were to pass a bond in recent years, the current match for this program for these two projects is almost $6 million. So they would not they would likely be unable to pass a bond to cover the entire match for the project. They only have $30,000 in cash to contribute to this project, along with $600,000 that they've already spent to date towards the project. So approval of this appeal would amount to about $5 million for the district to help pay for their matching share. The district has indicated that without the district board's approval, they will not be able to move forward with their project. So on attachment C in the item, the board has approved the board has heard 15 prior appeals for financial hardship, other evidence. 7 were approved, 3 were partially approved, 5 were not approved. The reasons for those requests vary and the board's approval, so it's for the board to decide which way they want to lean on this one, and if the district has put in substantial or other evidence demonstrable to the board in your minds. So with that, we did present 2 options for the board. The first option is to approve the district's appeal. In option 1, we have attached funding shells for those 2 that would provide the full state share and financial hardship match for those projects. Alternatively, the district, we presented option 2. They are qualifying projects even if they don't have financial hardship status. So we presented funding options as option 2. But like I said, the district has indicated they will not be able to move forward with the project unless the board chooses option 1. And the district is here to speak on their behalf.
Great, thank you, Mr. Watanabe. Jacoby Creek Elementary School District Superintendent, Ms. Melanie Nazizi. Please, no, I really. Nanitsi, and their consultant, Christopher DeLong, is here as well, if you want to say anything. Nanitsi, thank you. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
I think that the appeal is really well laid out, and I appreciate OPSC for presenting it so nicely. I also want to say my sincere thanks to the State Allocation Board for taking time to hear our appeal today. If you have any questions for me regarding the appeal, or if you'd like to know anything more about our district, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? Mr. DeLong, would you like to know? Any other public comment?
I do have
Yes, please.
Mr. Watanabe.
Please, do you mind turning on your microphone, Assemblymember? Thank you.
Yes.
And I just want to note that I believe Assemblymember Alvarez, thank you for being here, is here.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Watanabe, am I correct in understanding that in making the or providing options 1 and 2, well, first of all, you're not making a recommendation. That's correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but am I correct in understanding that the Allocation Board staff does an analysis in terms of the degrees of financial hardship that you recommend?
I would say that's a fair, accurate statement. When you look at attachment C for the ones that the district has, or that the board has approved in the past under other evidence, this would generally be consistent with those prior approvals.
But you have an analysis where you recommend, like, what percentage of the financial hardship allocation to present in the options?
Yeah, in this case, for financial hardship for other editors, it's a status, so it's all or nothing. Either
It's
they
all
are
or
not.
nothing.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it's defined by statute and our regulations. So
Correct.
while when they go slightly over, like in this case, it has to come to the board because there's no authority for the Office of Public School Construction to grant the hardship. But when there's a lot of different hardship appeals that come before the board. Many of them, well, a few of them we have not supported as a board because of the extenuating circumstances. This one, however, is consistent with the other appeals we've heard, where really, and I'm saying this in a very non-technical way, they are so close and have done absolutely everything they could have done, including a bond, including having their own cash, including getting the county involved. So that's where I think these differences come in. But the reason it's before the board is because it didn't meet the letter of the requirements for a hardship per se in order to get this 100% funding.
Yeah, no, I understand the reason why it's presented to the board, but so in terms of the the financial hardship dollar amount, it's 5.69 million or nothing.
From a financial hardship share, yes, they still qualify for the state share regardless of whether the board chooses option 1 or 2.
But we don't have the option of, say, giving half of that as financial hardship.
They haven't. The board hasn't done that in the past
Uh-huh.
because they're just approving it out as a status standpoint. But there
Uh-huh.
have been approvals in the past where the board had said, "Well, we will approve financial hardship for just design.
Okay.
Go out, get your design approval, start your plans, get those approved, and come back, and then go to your voters." In this case, this district has already passed the design stage of the project, so approving just for design doesn't make sense in this particular
Mhm.
case.
Okay, thank you.
If you were interested, Assembly Member, in doing half, for example,
Mhm.
that is option 2, where the state does half and the district does half, but there's no hardship assessment for that. That's what they qualify for naturally. That wouldn't have come to the board. So the appeal, they've qualified for the 2.5, do you want to go ahead? Yeah, please.
What I interpret that you're asking is that you're saying kind of meet halfway and not giving us the over 5 million, but maybe say, okay, we could maybe make a $2.5 million contribution. Unfortunately, we would be in the exact same spot because we've contributed $600,000 to the project already, and we have $42,000 left in the bond fund. So I'm happy to pitch that in, but the 2.5 million, we would still be in the same spot we are.
Sure. No, I understand. We had a chance to.
Yeah.
To talk earlier, and so I understand your position. I'm just trying to understand the process that it sounds like
Okay.
in terms of the dollar amount of the financial hardship, it's all or nothing.
If we deem a financial hardship, we very rarely then go further and parse hardship. But it is, ostensibly, it is possible, but it has to be based on a phase of construction. So because the plans are done and now we're in the construction phase, there's not a lot of other ways to actually parse the dollars. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I think our regs are kind of silent on any type of partial approval. In general, the way the financial hardship program normally works, it's a 2-step process. So the first step is, do you qualify or not? And we call it a light switch test, and it's these 3 criteria. Under that criteria, they do not meet that. The only way to flip that switch on for them is for the board to say, yes, you meet other evidence. The second review, we do a full financial hardship review where we actually pull all their accounting records, see what cash you have available, and we've actually already done that part too. So as she's mentioned, all we've identified is about $30,000 in cash beyond their bond funds that can be spent on this particular project.
And so my question is to that second part that you just talked about. So you did review their books, and you determined that in order for them to be able to accomplish the construction and the modernization plans that they have, that they be allocated the full financial hardship amount.
Everything but the everything but the $30,000 in cash they have, plus the $600,000 they've already spent.
Mm-hmm.
So the remaining $5 million is the delta there.
Okay. And so the way I interpret that is that after you reviewed the books, you made the determination that they do in fact need the full $5.69 million in the financial hardship in order to be able to successfully complete their.
We don't cross that far yet. That's the phase 1 that we haven't been able to cross that line. The phase 2 review where we do look at their financials is just in case the board approves it. We already know how much cash they have, but we are not weighing in and saying they do qualify for financial hardship. That's the phase 1 where their appeal is here now for you guys to determine. They meet the other evidence criteria, go ahead and call them financial hardship.
So, Mr. Watanabe, though, I think what Assemblymember Atsushi is saying is, have you verified the cost of construction?
We verified that they are eligible for up to $12 million in state and financial hardship combined funding.
Right, but the question is, and I think this is a question to the district, Assemblymember Atsushi, we can only determine cost of construction based on what the district is telling us. We do some very general verification, but the plans that come from the district is what we're using to verify that cost of construction.
So in other words, we make the determination that they're eligible or not for financial hardship, and once we make that determination, we rely on the school district's representation as to how much money they need.
Based on construction costs.
It's
which
based
will
on
have-
program
right,
eligibility.
right.
So they have a new construction project and a modernization project. New construction is based on a need to house pupils that we do verify that eligibility. And then the modernization is based on age of the building. So we have verified that part as well. And that's what option 2 is saying, that no matter what the board chooses on the financial hardship aspect of it, they do have an eligible construction project. But if you go with option 2, it's saying they have to contribute their full matching share for the
Okay.
project.
Great, thank you, Mr. Morales, and then Senator Wilt.
No, you had your mic first.
I think I just wanted to clarify, and Mr. Watanabe mentioned this, that even if the district gets their financial hardship status approved, then staff does, and they already did in this case, take a look at what they have as available cash contribution. So the state doesn't automatically pay the local match. They take a look to see what they have to contribute, and then that takes, it's offset from from the local match that the state pays, which has been done in this case. Is that correct, Mr. Watanabe?
In option 1, we've already offset.
Yes.
Great.
So it's already been taken into account as part of option 1.
Thank you. That was a really
So,
helpful
yeah, thank you for
clarification.
clarifying that. Really enjoyed our conversation yesterday. I'm sorry you have to go through this. I think this is just a perfect storm. This district did everything that the state has required them to do, and arbitrarily are off by a bit, by no fault of their own. These educators want to educate, not build buildings, but it's part of the job, I guess. So when appropriate, I'd like to make the motion for option 1.
Great, thank you. There's a motion for option 1. Any other public comment?
No, I'm down here.
Oh, yes, please,
Okay, yeah.
Assemblymember Davies.
Thank you. I just have a comment, and as as the senator was talking about, it is a perfect storm. And if you look at the timing, it's almost impossible to get school bonds passed now. And when you look at the affordability and, and what the residents are dealing with, they're not going to put the money there. And so I know you can sit there and try, but even in my area, the last 6 years, nothing's passed. So you can hope that they will, but if you don't have that money, you can't match it. And it's obvious also looking through this that there are some safety issues in these buildings. And so to me, this is urgent. We've got kids in there, and these things need to be dealt with ASAP. And so I would definitely support this, and I'd be happy to be a second if we already have a first for option 1.
Great, thank you. We have a motion
Thank
and
you,
a second.
Assemblymember.
Assemblymember Alvarez, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just, as being new and having not seen an appeal before me, although I've read some of the previous appeals, I guess I just want to set expectations for potentially in the future, us finding ourselves in the same or similar situation. How is staff going to determine which projects that don't meet the threshold but are, as was, I think I'll just use air quotes, close enough? What is close enough going to be? Because is this then now going to allow more folks to appeal saying, we're really close, we don't have any more money, and are we going to find ourselves with more of these appeals? I just want to know so that we can set expectations.
Do you want to answer that, Mr. Watanabe? So I will say, as a person who rarely supports appeals, that this designation is, we go through essentially a checklist. So it's support from the county and education. It is a passed bond, so you have to have actually passed a bond. To Ms. Davies' point, having tried and failed, in my opinion, actually doesn't count. Having some skin in the game, so to speak, in terms of being able to offset what is now the state share. So I think it's a great question, but there are certain criteria in all of the ones that you've seen, few of which the Department of Finance has actually supported. But in these rare cases where the district comes in and has gone through absolutely every one of those steps, that's what I personally and the staff brings to the board as having been through everything. But you'll note that staff would never, because it's not consistent with statute and regulations, staff isn't supporting it. that's why it has to come to the board. So there really is no close enough. It's always entirely up to this body to determine whether or not they qualify for hardship.
So I guess if there is another denial and an appeal of that, we should expect potentially under similar circumstances of you went for a bond, you don't have enough from any other district, that we might see more appeals like this one.
We see many appeals, especially as we get to the end of our bonds. It is by far the hardest thing this body ever has to do. And I'm thrilled that we are, and I appreciate your patience as well, but I'm thrilled that we're being really thoughtful as we have less and less money, and the consequences are significant for districts around the state. So absolutely, anyone can appeal for any reason. So the staff doesn't determine whether a district appeals. That is entirely led by the district. Once there's an appeal, the staff does this very lengthy analysis that Mr. Watanabe walked through. But absolutely, you should expect appeals
Okay.
anytime a district disagrees.
All right, you'll be busy.
Congratulations, Ms. Kirk. Thank you for that question. I sincerely appreciate it and know that we're all very mindful of limited resources. So moved by Senator Wilk, seconded by Assemblymember Davies. Ms. Jones, will you take the roll, please?
Senator Wilk?
Aye.
Senator Newman? Assemblymember Marisucci?
Aye.
Assemblymember Davies?
Aye.
Assemblymember Alvarez? Juan Morales?
Aye.
Ana Lasso?
Aye.
Gail Miller?
You do have enough votes in the event you need to get back. You're going to make me
Oh
cry,
my
so don't cry. But
I
we are,
thought this was like, no way. I'm so excited. I can't even believe that I'm so excited.
well,
Thank you very much. This will make
congratulations.
a tremendous impact on our community. Thank you so much. I appreciate the support.
Congratulations.
Wow, okay.
So there's a technical, we're going to keep the roll open.
Okay.
You sincerely don't have to stay. You absolutely have enough votes. That will not change. It has to stay open because we have one member that might come back to add on. So does that make sense to you, what
It
I'm
makes
doing right now?
perfect sense, and I'm
Okay.
I'll do
Okay,
what
well,
Chris tells
thank
me to
you-
do.
thank you for
Thank
being
you,
here, and
guys. I appreciate it
congratulations.
so much.
Thank you. So next, we will move to, I forgot to check if there was any online public comment. I'm sorry. No? Okay, great. Thank you. Next, we'll move to the annual adjustment to the school facility program grants, please, Mr. Watanabe.
Yeah, we're on page 117 of your agenda. This is an annual item we take to the board each year. The board is required by statute to adjust the school facility program grants based on the Class B construction cost index. Back in January 2016, this board chose to use the RS Means 12 California Cities, we call it, index, because it best represented the index for construction costs for the state. We did the calculation for this year. It is verified by an independent third party, and we're looking at a decrease in the grants of 1.33%. In an approval of this item, you're also approving a decrease in the threshold amount for track maps at the local level. They expire after a certain period of time unless they meet, unless they're below this threshold, or sorry, unless they're above this threshold. So we're recommending a change in that threshold as well, which would start March 1st of 2024. That would bring the threshold to $397,064. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Great. Any questions from the board? Please, Assemblymember Martucci.
So you said it's the calculation. Could you explain again how the 1.33 is calculated?
Yeah, so a company called RS Means, they publish a nationwide index, and in this book, they provide index based on Class B construction costs, looking at, let me pull out the data. They look at, let me pull a sheet that I won't mess it up for you.
The RS Means methodology?
Yes, RS Means methodology, correct.
It uses the.
It uses, so what we use is 12 California cities, but they actually use, it's based on materials used in 66 common construction materials in these particular 12 cities.
In California?
In California specifically. They do a nationwide index as well. In this book, it's about 50 pages, but they publish the index for every single city nationwide. So we only pull out the 12 California cities and look at that index number. We look at that index number for this year and we compare it to the index number of last year for all 12 California cities, do a percentage change, and then we average the change across those 12 cities for California only. So California is looking at a minus 1.33% for 2024. Just from a comparison standpoint, the 30 nationwide cities index that they also publish is a minus 1.27%. So it's not unique to California. It is a nationwide index change as well that they're
And in
showing.
part of this, because it is just this mathematical equation that we've been using since 2016, is based entirely on a really significant increase we've had in past years. So as we see this correction, this economic correction and inflation, we're seeing the same thing in construction costs. It by no means is suggesting that construction is infinitely cheaper. It's just a minor downward adjustment, like we're seeing kind of across the state in these 12 cities. But it is not at all suggesting that we're erasing the recognition of inflationary pressures in the past. And it is sincerely just math. There is no other option before the board today to accept, and we would have to delay other bond grants to figure out what this calculation is. We'd have to seek a different third-party analysis in order to do something other than the RS means and the straight math calculation that the board has done since 2016. Other questions before we call on public comment? Mr. Alvarez, please.
So we look at 12, the means, or whatever the name is looks at 12 cities, and this is an average. That means there are some cities where it's higher. What is the range in the 12 cities from a negative what to a positive what? And I'm assuming, go ahead.
The largest reduction is San Diego County at minus 3.43%. The opposite end of the spectrum is Riverside County at 0.84% positive.
Okay, so no one really substantially higher.
That's correct.
And why do we, for simplicity's sake, is that why we take those 12 cities and we average it statewide, and we wouldn't be able to do this more regionally for costs in places like, in this case, Riverside, that have actually maybe have risen? I know this year it seems insignificant, but maybe there could be years where it's much more higher in some regions.
The statute requires the adjustments to all the grants at the statewide index. So it's one number. We can't adjust regionally for the grants based on area.
That's in the statute.
That's in statute, statewide construction cost index.
And it's in the statute because the bonds tend to be, obviously, locals can do bonds like we just talked about, but the bond money that we are working with here is statewide. So we would have to change it in a number of places if we didn't want a statewide average of construction costs. Mr. Morales, yes, please.
And besides that, I do want to point out that the regulations do allow for a geographic percent factor for certain regions that have higher costs. That's broken out by different counties in the state that require higher costs because of their location. Is that correct, Mr. Watanabe?
That's correct. It ranges anywhere between 5% and I believe Catalina item goes up to 30% if I remember correctly. So there's a range. So we do, this grant is for your base grant calculation. And on top of that, we have lots of supplemental grants. And on top of that, we have our geographic factor index that adds on to that. And it's a percentage-based add-on.
Thank you, that's a great point. So with that, Mr. Duffy, if you want to come up and for cash, please. And then if anyone else would like to make a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand in the Zoom interface and please let me know. We have two. Thank you very much. We have two folks on Zoom. Mr. Duffy, we'll hear from you first. Thank you for being here. And then we will go to Zoom and if there's more questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Duffy, if I may, just because you've appeared before us so many times and I'm grateful, we did just receive this letter today at noon.
Yes. And thank you for your comments a few minutes ago. And in fact, I'll have to underscore and agree with your comments. So I'm Tom Duffy with the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. The Coalition is a unique organization that includes school districts and private sector entities that help school districts plan and finance and build schools. We are before you frequently on issues often in support. Sometimes we have differing views. In this circumstance, I have to thank Mr. Watanabe for his patience with us explaining what has happened with this particular item. We spent time with him yesterday. He was gracious and really quite patient in going through the details. And Chair Miller, your comments about the math, we do not challenge the calculations that are done. I think the issue here is the use of RS mains. And I know it's been used since 2016, but it doesn't, this number does not recognize what's happening in the field. So the letter that Chair Miller just mentioned that we were able to get to you by about noon today, we saw this item last week, and we were able to do some analysis during this time frame and yesterday. And so we tried to provide to you what we think are alternative numbers based on alternative indices. And if you look at the detail there, each of them is a positive. It's not a negative. And so what we're asking for you to do, and Ms. Miller, we are not asking that you not go forward with this. We recognize that staff at OPSC is going to prepare for apportionments for next month and beyond. What we're asking that you do is to ask your staff at OPSC to work with us and the experts that we know that we can bring to you that can speak to construction cost in great detail. We do mention in this letter, we mention lumber, we mention steel, we mention other factors that are included. This was a surprise for us and for our members to see. We're school district members, including just today, were saying, how could there be a decrease proposed in the grants when what we're experiencing in the field is an acceleration of cost? We as the CASH organization have a plan. We do educational programs for school districts. We have one tomorrow. We have one on the 15th of February on this very matter. And we're doing this because school districts are preparing to go to their local voters in the fall, in November, for school bonds, and they will project what those costs will be for these projects so they can go to their boards. Many of you know this, like you, Mr. Maritucci, having been on a board, that they want to be able to project well for what their boards would place before the voters. And part of what we tell them is don't create expectations that you cannot reach, because the cost of today are accelerating to the cost of tomorrow and next year. So what we're asking that you do is look at this again. The grants that are in place today are in a program that we like. This program works very well. The Office of Public School Construction administers a very complicated set of circumstances through a very, I think, direct program. The school facility program has been around since 1998. This program cost factors, the pupil grant cost factors, are not something that were identified specifically because of cost in 1998. There was a determination of changing from an older program that was a square foot based program to a pupil grant program to simplify it. When that was done, there was a question at that time, should we do these numbers really work? And there was a determination that they did not. During a period of about 2 or 3 years, we had what we called a grant adequacy review. It was state agents from your office, from CDE, from DSA, and others from schools. And we worked at this. In the bond of 2006, the state bond of 2006, because those dollar amounts were seen as less than were needed, there was an acceleration of cost. They were called the 773 because of high school, middle school, and elementary school grant factors. They're all different factors. At that same time, in that bond in 2006, and recognizing that this is not a finite science, the board was granted authority, and we reference that in the letter, for the board to actually increase the grant by your action, your authority, by 6% if you found that the grants are not adequate. So, and thank you for the opportunity to give you a little
Yeah,
snippet
I'm
of
gonna ask
history
you
there.
to- Well, I'm a little bit, I have to disagree with some of this, Mr. Duffy, but please conclude so we can hear from other folks
Okay.
to this
The,
afternoon as well.
something that I think is significant is that the legislature and the governor in the state of California is asking school districts to do more and more without additional cost.
That is
So
absolutely inaccurate, but please, we're not debating the entire state budget in Prop 98.
we are not, but school districts are now required to provide solar and battery storage, and there's not additional cost from this program for that. So I'll
There is
conclude.
additional cost in the state budget, though,
Well,
within the Prop 98 guarantees. So we can't have a debate about the state budget while we're here.
and my intent is not to. And
Well,
I
but
don't want
you're-
to mix up general fund and capital funds either, Madam Chair.
Right,
So
but it's-
I'll conclude
Thank
by
you.
simply saying, we would like to work with your staff to review this matter, not to stop you from trying to help districts by apportioning funds next month or beyond. But this is such a critical thing to school districts. The cost of building schools in California is greater than any other state in the nation. We build the smallest schools at the greatest cost per square foot. Thank you for your graciousness to me and all of you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. So I do want to correct a little bit, Mr. Duffy, but let's go to our other public comments. Thank you very much
Okay.
for being here this afternoon. May we have our other two public comments, please?
Okay, our first one is from Sasha Horowitz.
Sasha Horowitz, if you please could unmute yourself. And address the board. Sasha Horowitz,
Thank you, members.
thank you.
Sasha Horowitz with Los Angeles Unified School District. We'd like to align our comments, or at least some of them, with CASH's. We find that the 1.33% reduction is not aligned with our experience on the ground, and we believe that other indices would make a more accurate reflection of current construction and labor costs. And so we would urge you to consider alternatives to the RS Means Index. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next public comment, please. Alan Rising, please address the board. Alan Rising,
I'm sorry, as we get on here. So
thank
so
you.
thank you, board members, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity today to address this very important item. My name is Alan Rising. I'm the current chair for the Coalition of Adequate School Housing. So today, as you'd said, we'd sent a letter to all of the board indicating some of our concerns related with this item of a cost reduction. I think it's important for board to understand that as a practitioner of this work, in a large school district in Southern California, executing millions upon millions of dollars of work, this does not accurately reflect the true costs of construction as we are seeing it day in and day out across our state. The index doesn't accurately reflect the true cost of work for schools in California. As schools work to address the unique needs that we have in California for our schools, to address the issues that are being imposed upon schools, to address the state's climate goals, do things such as install new solar systems on projects, revitalize and update structural standards in our schools, install EV charging stations and other infrastructure to help support those type of state climate goals. The RS Means Index fails to address those specific needs that our schools have. It's important to remember that our grants are determined by per pupil grants and are not determined by scope of work that's being imposed upon each one of our projects. The cost model used initially to create these funding per pupil grants was built back in 1998 and has now materially differed from what the real life work that is happening at each of our schools. Although that cost model was escalated by percentages over time, it is built on an imperfect and non-relevant standard that we no longer build our schools to. Our building codes, our green codes, our requirements in our schools have changed dramatically since 1998. Again, we provided information in our letter to the board today that has indicated other standards, other indexes, real-life practitioners from both industry partners in construction, as well as other industry publications that do not align with a reduction in our cost across our industry. Each of our districts across the state are routinely seeing 4, 5, 6% increase in our construction costs day in and day out. And in fact, in some specialty sections and specialty sectors, we see increases in excess of 10% that are coming in over our initial projections on these costs. So in closing, I won't continue with other issues, but I implore you to take a look at the letter that we sent to you today. But what our request is for the board to exercise its judgment and allow for an increase in construction cost index between 4 to 6%, which is allowable by regulation of this board, and also direct staff to examine the issue of the adequacy of our student grants to ensure that the grants that are being provided to each one of our school districts really meet the intent of the laws to ensure that we're providing our fair share, the state's fair share, towards the housing and the support of each one of our students in California. So thank you very much for an opportunity to address this board, and I appreciate your support.
Thank you very much, sir. Any other public comment? So I do want to kind of talk about, this was published last Wednesday. Today is the first we're hearing of it. We can always torture numbers until they tell us what we need to hear. So what I would recommend is we're at the end of this program. If we don't approve this today, we wait, so we have a few options. I'm happy to direct staff to explore other indices and work with the working group. That is not a board action. I would encourage you to work with the working group, and we can determine, Mr. Duffy, I will ask you, after 2 decades before this board, to come to the staff with ample opportunity to have a chance to respond. I'm surprised at the timing of this letter, and the fact that we had no time between 12:43 today and now to analyze it and get additional information. So we're not able to talk about different indices, and some of the comments today, while not part of the OPSC program, are part of the state budget. We can't look at school funding in a silo if we're talking about all the additional and additive features that the state legislature, along with the administration, have put on schools. So what I would recommend is we're at the end of this bond program. There is a bond being discussed in the legislature now. I would recommend with the board's approval, so that we are able to move on and continue to use what's left in this grant program, that we adopt the RMS means projection today. Staff will continue to work on this, and as we are involved with the legislature, the administration, in these bond discussions, we will have these additional conversations about other indices and other ways to consider what construction is and is not in terms of different indices that lead to different conclusions in terms of construction. And then the board will determine an appropriate index to use when, in fact, if the voters were to pass another bond. So with that, I want to open it back up to questions with the understanding that the board will absolutely, the staff will absolutely work on some of the concerns and issues we've heard today, so that we can have a forthright analysis that the board can review in the coming months. Mr. Martucci?
Yes, I want to ask what would be concerns raised if we deferred the adoption of this measure to the February board meeting?
Right now, all the items we tentatively have for January were held over for February until we do the adjustments, so they get the grant that's approved for the board. Whatever grant amount the board approves is approved for all projects in the calendar year. So if you hold off the decision, we cannot, we could still present the projects next month, but we couldn't release any funding because we have to wait for them all to be adjusted the following month. So we'd be pushing it off to a March or later board until the board actually chooses what grant they want to use.
No district in the state gets money the longer we
For a
delay.
month.
Or at
Until
least a
the
month.
board
My
takes
question
action.
is to Mr. Watanabe.
Yeah, until the
I
board takes
understand
action
that.
on the grant amounts.
I'm sorry?
Until the board takes action on the grant amounts, we shouldn't present those funding items because we won't know how much to give them.
All right, thank you.
Yes, please, Ms. Davies.
Question in regards to coming up with these numbers. I just want to clarify, are we keeping in mind the cost of labor going up, minimum wage? Also, that includes any mandates, regulations, any legislation that was passed last year that would have been increases, to construction? And the year before, I'm just curious if, you go with these numbers, what happens then when perhaps the numbers aren't quite as accurate, and now you have to have, change orders, and the money's not there to, complete that change order? I mean, being on a city council and dealing with, construction and projects, that happens a lot. So I guess that's just my concern is, I was surprised to see that there really wasn't much of a change. Personally, I thought it might be a little bit more just doing construction myself. And so I guess that's my concern is, making sure that we do have the money there to fund, that there's not going to be change orders and that they're having things sitting there like, now what do we do? Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, two things. So with the chair's comments out bringing back future information, we could bring back what the board looked at back in 2016. We considered 3 different indices at the time and why that RS means was chosen. Based on those 12 California cities, they also look at those 66 common construction materials in those 12 cities. They do look at union labor. They look at prevailing wages based on those individual locations. So it should be California-based for RS means. The letter mentions the engineering news and record. We did consider that back in 2016. They mentioned San Jose, Sacramento, and San Diego in their letter. At the time we looked at that indices back in 2016, they only used LA and San Francisco for their calculation. For materials, they averaged it based on 3 materials using spot pricing from a single source in each of those 2 cities only. And their wages were based on fringe labor rates for bricklayers, carpenters, and structural iron workers only. So it wasn't as comprehensive as the RS means. We also looked at the Sierra West group, but that one, they didn't have a statewide index. They were based on 20 U.S. cities and based on 23 construction materials in the 20 cities, in 20 of those cities. So it also was not California-based as well. We looked at a few other indices at that time. They were not available to us to purchase, so we could not use them for our purpose. The other companies, we'd have to research into more, even if there are even options for the board before we even consider those.
Thank you.
Mr. Alvarez?
Thank you. First of all, to those folks who made public comment and who are here today, this is what a public hearing is for you to come forward and provide your testimony, and the board should be ready to incorporate testimony as part of our decision-making. So thank you for, even if it was a few hours ago, it's still a public process, and this is how it works. And so thank you for coming forward. To the history of, which you just walked us through, Mr. Watanabe, it's important. So in 2016, the board made a policy decision of utilizing a particular index as the one to set, to set these rate increases, which in statute, as written by the legislature, requires us in the January of every 2 years to review the increase. Is that correct?
Every year, not every 2 years.
Oh, every year.
The second item is every 2 years.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So every year we review this. The statute says we must do it in January. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
I believe, yeah, it is that specific.
Okay.
I don't have that particular one.
Is the statute silent on whether we can revisit that figure in the future board meeting?
Yeah, statute simply says the board shall annually adjust the per unhoused people apportionment to reflect construction cost changes as set forth in the statewide cost index for Class B construction as determined by the board.
Right. So there was a policy decision, which I want to be respectful of in 2016, that we said, let's use this index, and I respect that. But the statute also says that it's the determination of the board. So we could today decide there's another alternative method or index we would like to use. We are authorized to do that.
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like we're also authorized to potentially revisit that figure and perhaps change it. So to what the chair is suggesting, that we make a decision today, I do think in order to, my opinion, would be interested in my colleague's opinion, is statute says we should set something. I think we should decide on a figure. It appears to me that that could be revisited We should probably get legal counsel opinion on that for maybe revisiting the adjustment at another date.
Do you mean revisited as make the 1.33 adjustment later, but maybe 6 months from down the line, change it?
Correct. So not making it later, making it a
Oh.
decision today, and then changing it at another
We
point.
probably have to look with legal on that one.
Yeah, we need to get some legal analysis so then that could give you the time to continue to further analyze. It is also unfair to ask you to analyze this quickly and make a decision point without really diving deeper into what they utilize in terms of their index. So I think that's the best, in my case, in my opinion, that we can offer given the confluence of testimony, of where we are, and of our legal obligation, which is, as I understand, to set this number, but perhaps revisiting it in the future. So that would be my input to this conversation.
And we do have legal counsel here if you want to opine on the ability to set it today and then change it at a future date.
I don't know if I can opine on changing it in the future. The one thing that I am, just hearing this now, a potential concern I would have is if we set it now and then we bring, applications that we're, giving grants to in February, and then we change it after that, there's going to be an issue there because you're going to have conflicting, grant amounts for different periods of time within the same year. We could potentially also adjust that, but that's one potential issue there. I would like a little bit more time to take a look at this and see if that's something that we can revisit. If that's something that the board wishes to do.
So I think there's just a second, Ms. Lasso, two pieces of information that the board needs. One is just additional indices, and then two is a two-part action by the board, one now and one later. Ms. Lasso, do you have a follow-up to that?
Well, I was going to say, I agree with legal counsel that if there's a different position that we take action on as later on in the year, we also have to take into consideration any retroactive. And to be fair, if the adjustment is adopted later in a different number, it applies to the whole year, understanding that this is something that we do annually. So we have to take into consideration that impact to our fund as well.
And then, just to be clear, if we approve this today, we start issuing funds. If we don't, we would wait even on the actions we took today. Is that correct?
We would have to go back and adjust everybody. Every project gets a grant agreement that spells out, this is the amount you're eligible for, this is what the board approved your project for, and all the conditions are based on that, so we'd have to redo all that work.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Windsor,
So what is the current wait period between the time that a district submits an application for a school facilities program grant versus when the grant is authorized? Ballpark. I'm just trying to get a sense of whether, I don't know, Mr. Duffy, if a month to work with the staff would be adequate to.
I could marshal resources. I apologize. I can marshal resources quickly, Assemblymember Maritucci, and the meeting with Mr. Watanabe quickly too. If that's what you'd like me to do, when I leave here, I've got several people in my phone that I'll call, and we'll begin immediately. As I said, we're going to be looking at this very issue at a web shop we have. It's 2 hours in February. But I'm here to do whatever I can do to assist Mr. Watanabe and you as a board.
It looks like we're currently working on projects received ranging from January to roughly June of 2020.
Okay.
A month would be ample time.
Well, I think the question is, and happy to listen to the will of the committee, but it's not really whether or not, there's a lot of work that goes into these analyses. the board would actually have to approve it. So I don't know that, I appreciate that for cash, a month is ample time. I would like to, recognizing that we are, in fact, Mr. Alvarez, grateful for public comment, but do think it's important that we correct some of the statements for the record, especially in terms of the OPSE staff and respecting the integrity of that process. But with that, I think, it is the will of the committee. I think there's a few options before us. One is to approve the RMS means data today without knowledge. I think what we do know about revisiting in the future, to Mr. Alvarez's question, is it could actually complicate our system. We could wait potentially a month or more. I don't want to guarantee that this complete analysis, it may be completed by cash. We cannot guarantee that the complete analysis will be done by OPSC with all of the legal requirements. We could probably guarantee that by the March meeting. I think it may be too soon to guarantee it for the February meeting because it is a two-part analysis. It's not just a cash analysis. Or we can wait for legal advice as to whether or not we could approve it today. But my concern is if there's any inclination that this may change, we're probably better off with this single estimate and having these districts wait on the money. So with that, yes, Ms. Lasso.
My last question for Mr. Watanabe is, if this comes before the board every year, and I have been on this board for a couple of years, when was the last time that the annual adjustment went down?
Yeah, this is only the second time in the history of the SFP that the grants went down. Back in 2010, it dropped as well. The board did approve that CCI adjustment for that year, and then 2011, the grants went back up again.
Thank
But
you.
this is the second drop.
It rarely, as Mr. Watanabe explained, it rarely goes down because it rarely goes up as much as it has the previous 2 years. So with that, what is the will of the committee? I think there's a motion to accept the RS means data. I will second. Ms. Jones, will you call the roll?
Senator Wilk,
Aye.
Senator Newman. Aye. Assemblymember Murasucci.
No.
Assemblymember Davies.
No.
Assemblymember Alvarez.
No.
Juan Morales. Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Aye.
Does not pass.
We have 4, well, we're keeping all the rolls open,
Well, we
Ms.
are.
Jones. So we have 4 aye votes, 3 no votes. Mr. Morales, are you
Yes.
no vote?
Maybe I can make an alternative motion, and I think that February is too soon. This is a complex issue, and I want to make sure that staff has enough time. And I want to also just read out the fact that it's, a lot of things were brought up in terms of the funding for schools. Right now, we're talking about the annual changes in construction, right? But this is what gets adjusted to the base grants that were set in statute. And there were some comments that were made about whether those were enough or not back in 1998. And that, I think, is still an issue. That, I think, though, would may be more appropriate within the context of a new bond. The annual changes in construction, I think that that's something that the board has wrestled with in the past. And I think it was back in 2015 when we had different alternatives for the board to consider, went with RS means, because we thought back then that it reflected the actual cost in California, because it used the California cities. And then in 2016, I think we came back to the board, and the board asked us if we thought that there was other indices that could be used. And at that point, the direction was that there wasn't any other ones, and the board decided to use it moving forward. And I think what I wanted to highlight from that process is that it focused on the method, not the actual adjustment, not the numbers, but are we using the right methodology that reflects changes in construction in California? It is counterintuitive that this year they've gone down, but I think it's important to focus on the methodology that's being used and not necessarily the number. So if there's an interest to have staff take a look at the indices, I think that February would be too soon. I would say that March would be probably the soonest to have a fair analysis, knowing the complexities of looking at that.
Yeah, and March may be too soon, too. I mean, we start a new process now. First, we would determine the index, and then we would have to determine the amount. Do you have an alternate motion? We still have an open roll, so we'd have to.
I don't know if the right amount of time to give staff to actually take a look at whether there
Well, I
are
think,
alternatives.
Well, there is a consideration on indices that came up in 2016 too. They have to be accessible and used for us. Like the RS means index, we actually have to pay the company to be able to use it for this purpose. We haven't blessed that with all the other companies. So even if we were to look at it, we don't know that we can actually use them, which is why, for example, one particular company was not used in 2016, even in the analysis. We can't buy it, they won't sell it to us. So that is a consideration.
right,
As you look for the grant adequacy calculation, how that would be, I would point out that when this statute first passed after AB 127 that Mr. Duffy referenced, OPSC staff attempted analysis. It took over a year. We could not get the data we needed from school districts to be able to run that analysis completely on the full cost of construction and the scopes of work to do that analysis. We did hire an independent third party. It took them 6 months to create a full analysis for that. So it's not a fast process to do that full analysis. And like the chair mentioned, with the current funds we have on status of funds, we'll be out by the end of the year.
So
please, Mr.
thank you.
Marisucci, yeah.
So that was a lot that you just said. Are you basically saying that 2 months is not enough time?
2 months is not enough time to do a grant adequacy discussion. There's no way I think we can do that
Right,
part of it.
yeah.
But
What
just
I don't-
representing the different indices and what might be out there, we could probably look into that part of it.
But we won't be able, what you're saying, Mr. Watanabe, is we will not be able to determine a new factor in 2 months. We could begin to present indices, at which point the state would have to go through a procurement process to find a new company. This has to be verifiable. It can't be a determination by any specific group. Thank you. Mr. Alvarez, did you have a follow-up? No? Oh, thank you. So what I think, the roll is open. We'll go on to the next item. And I don't think, Mr. Morales, it sounded like you didn't have an alternate motion because we won't be able to determine and certainly can't determine here today the amount of time it will take to meet the requirements of statute and procurement to come up with a new index to determine the amount. So,
No, I think, again, I think it's worthwhile to explore whether there's other alternatives. I'm concerned that staff have adequate time to do that analysis. And right now, again, I'm just focused on the changes in construction cost,
right.
not a full, grant adequacy. That is a much more in-depth discussion that takes much longer. It was years, that we
Yep.
had discussions in the past. So this is just what is the right index to use for annual changes.
Right,
And whether
absolutely.
RS means is the right one or not, assuming that we can, if we have the discussion later on, that we don't have changes, we have challenges, legal challenges in adjusting the projects that have not been funded yet. But they would have to wait. That's the downside.
I mean, my deep concern about this is that schools have to wait now until we actually approve this, which has been my largest concern. Not that this isn't absolutely going forward, as I mentioned, in the school bond, or how we're going to continue to fund this program. That's a very reasonable request. At the very end of a program, it is a much less reasonable request, given the amount of time we have to get schools their money. Mrs. Lasso?
Well, I think you took the words out of my mouth, and that my concern is really, whether the number's up or down is getting the funds to the schools that are in need. And I think there's hope that if there were other indices that could be used, and if those numbers were different, we could look at some kind of retroactive, if the board should take action, we could take a retroactive look at the whole year. But what I don't want is to stall any funds that are flowing to schools that have been waiting, especially since they've been waiting for so long. So my hope is that we are able to find something, and definitely want to look at, for the future bond, what are our resources and tools that we can use to set this adjustment, and think about, 1998, things were very different, technologies were very different, and it is true that today we are asking schools to be much more than 960 square feet classrooms. They're everything to communities. And so a school program in 98 to a school program in 2024 is significantly different, and that should be taken into consideration for future bonds.
Ms. Davies, and then Ms.
Thank you.
Mr. Marzucci.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Just a thing, in regards to these projects, they've been, started in 2020. So are these funds already allocated to certain projects? Like, we know where this is going?
No, that's a really great question. So we don't know, all we know is the total amount we have, and unfortunately, that's what expires with even the general fund at the end of this year. So we do need a solution to this to our bond program, and we can talk a lot about what happens at the end of a bond program, but we really, in the state of California, never want to get to that point because it means increased developer fees and other things. So what we're trying to do, and part of the reason for the general fund allocation for this past year and a half has been to continue this program until we can get to another bond this November. And that's why in the governor's budget, you saw a proposal to make sure we have a discussion about another bond, at which point we would oftentimes with new bonds, these discussions are part of it, how we're considering the allocation, what the base costs are, what the regional costs are, where those costs come from, how they're allocated and calculated.
Have you ever had this in the past, since perhaps like the bond that you allocated last year, did you ever have any of these projects come back saying, listen, you know what, this is not, the construction company is saying this is not going to do it. We have change orders. We need more money. This wasn't enough. What that was allocated to actually do what it was going to do. And then what happens?
Mr. Watanabe?
Once your apportionment's made and we allocate the funding to your project, you're considered full and final. There's no adjustments for change orders or changes to the project. So, and that's actually in statute that it is a full and final apportionment. That any liabilities, even lawsuits, that's all borne by the district from that point forward.
Thank you.
Mr.
So-
Marzucci?
Thank you. I just want to explain what I'm trying to do and where I'm coming from. I'm just hearing, all the school districts represented by cash, including Los Angeles Unified, our state's biggest school district, raising issues about whether this number 1.33% reduction is an accurate representation of construction costs that they are seeing on the ground. But I'm hearing that in order to derive this number, we had to go through this lengthy process of approving a contract with a third-party company to do all the analysis to come up with this, and that revising this number, it just doesn't sound practical in terms of the balancing of the equities, in terms of calculating or reconsidering the process that it took to arrive at this 1.33% reduction figure. Is that all accurate?
Yeah, and I think Ms. Morales explained it pretty well back in 2016. The board bounced back and forth which indices they were using each year, and sometimes it was a matter of convenience, which one was the highest one, and that's not always the best way. So the board wanted to firm it up so we weren't bouncing around each year, and that's why we presented that report back in 2016. The grant adequacy study, that the report we did back in 2007, it showed grants were adequate back then, but the board didn't accept that report and didn't choose to reduce the grant as a result of that report either. We don't know what this new report will say compared to our grants, but if we pursue that route, that's for the board's consideration as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear any other comments from the board, but for the sake of moving forward with the completion of the current bond program, I'm willing to reconsider my vote.
Thank you. We actually have a request to open the roll again. Before I do that, Ms. Jones, I do want to clarify, no matter what the outcome of this vote is, there is a request, Ms. Kirk and Mr. Watanabe, from the board that we continue to explore various indices and costs. And as you work with the legislature and the Department of Finance and the administration on this new school bond, these questions before the board, I think, are very, very important. So it would be helpful in the executive director's report to have a status update on the school bond. And then as we're learning new information, perhaps we can include in the executive director's report an update on the conversations as we continue to work through these issues, please. With that, Ms. Jones, can you call?
May I?
Oh, please, Mr. Alvarez, I apologize.
I would request an amendment to the motion in addition to what's been requested already from staff, that we request from council opinion on resetting the number at another point during the year and what those implications would mean to already approved and allocated actions that we may take, because we don't know whether we're taking them, in February, in terms of potentially retroactively making them full if for some reason that figure were to be higher. And I would ask in interest, like Mr. Martucci, of moving forward so that we don't delay projects, I would ask that would be added to the motion. I
Great.
don't know who made the motion, but I request that.
Thank you. So the motion, thank you, Senator Newman. So I think it sounds to me like Mr. Martucci and Mr. Alvarez are asking for two amendments to your motion. One is what I just described as the direction to staff on a working group, and reporting would actually be a part of the motion. Working groups reporting and updates on the school bond negotiations. Second would be that council provides a legal opinion as to whether the board is able to adjust at any point during the year the adjustment we are considering right now. And then, Mr. Alvarez, correct me if I'm wrong, but would you like a policy implication for that as to what it would do to previous awards, or you just want to know the nature of whether the board is allowed to?
Whether we'd be allowed to retroactively, I'm using the phrase make them whole, but essentially
Got it.
hold them to the same standard that the rest of the awardees would be the rest of the year.
If we could, and then retroactively actually make sure that we accommodate the delta between the folks that have already received the funding and those that get it after a new amount.
And so I'm willing to accept those two amendments to the motion.
Senator.
I do want to clarify, I mean, to the extent that we're talking about the end of the year, we're talking about the end of the fiscal year, correct? Or
We
is it the
have-
calendar year?
It's,
Calendar year,
We
okay, so
are,
I think that's important.
they are,
Okay.
it's a really good point, Senator Newman. We are very, very close on this funding. So we are, it's beyond July, but it is, and we are hoping to make it till the end of November.
Okay, appreciate it. But I'm fine with amending the motion.
Great, thank you. So we have a three-part motion, members, and we will call the roll again. To adopt the annual adjustment, the RS means adjustment, as presented by staff, to create a working group, to also have a monthly report by the executive director on the different indices available on communications on the bond, and on if we could do a little bit of a primer on base amounts versus regional amounts so that there's a lot of clarity. And three will be the ability of the board to retroactively change the amount at a future date, and council will provide that opinion. Are you, Mr. Alvarez, just to clarify that, is that okay by March, or do you want to see that in February?
I would just suggest as soon as possible.
Okay, just as soon as possible, great. So that's a three-part motion, and it's as soon as possible for the legal opinion. So any other changes to that motion? It was moved by Senator Newman. I can't now remember, did I second? And I will second that amended motion. So may we call the roll again, please, Ms. Jones?
Senator Wilk.
No. I'm kidding, yes. I want to see if everybody's paying attention.
Senator Newman. Assemblymember Murasucci.
Aye.
Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Assemblymember Alvarez.
Aye.
Juan Morales.
Aye.
Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Aye, that motion passes. We will now move on to the second part of this same issue with Mr. Watanabe, the index adjustment of the assessment for development.
Thank you. We're on stamp page 126 of the agenda, as the chair mentioned. This is also our annual, this is a biannual item presented every 2 years in even number years. And this is to adjust the maximum allowable assessment for level 1 developer fees. It's based on a 2-year average, as I mentioned, so when you net out the prior year's increase and this year's decrease, we're recommending an increase to the maximum level 1 assessment of 7.84%. And the amounts that I'll bring it to you is $5.17 for residential construction and 84 cents for commercial industrial construction per square foot. And those amounts, again, are spelled out for you on page 127.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from the board? Any public comments? Do we have anyone on Zoom? No public comment? Great, what is the will of the board on this item?
Wilk moves.
Thank you, Senator Wilk. Great. Moved by Senator Wilk, seconded by Mr. Martucci. May we call the roll, please, Ms. Jones?
Sure. Senator Wilk.
Aye.
Senator Newman. Assemblymember Marasucci. Assemblymember Davies. Assemblymember Alvarez. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Ana Lasso.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Aye. I forgot to mention on the last item, I don't think Senator Laird is coming unless we've heard differently. Okay. We will keep it open, but that also has enough votes. And now the workload for the remainder of the month. Mr. Watanabe, please.
Month projected workload is on page 128 of the agenda, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Any public comment? With that, I'm just going to call out the results of our, the minutes were passed just because we left all the roll open.
Thank you.
The consent agenda was approved. The RS means adjustment with the 2 additional motions were approved, and the annual adjustment to the school facility grants for the, was approved with the 2 amendments that we just discussed. And finally, the index adjustment of the assessment for development were.
And Jacoby Creek.
And Jacoby Creek. Most importantly, the Jacoby Creek appeal was approved.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.